welcome back to the second episode of Sell on Monday, the weekly buy or sell show that I have for when it comes down to the racing from the world throughout the big three. The big three being F1, IndyCar, and NASCAR, and just what I think about the races throughout the week. So F1 was in Bahrain, IndyCar was at St. Pete, and NASCAR was in the desert at Vegas this week. Um, but yeah, I guess we'll start with F1, where Fernando Alonso ends up popping up and ends up stealing free practice two. I believe Sergio won free practice one. I did not see run down from free practice three, but then Max Verstappen and Checo both locked out the front row for Red Bull, followed by a Ferrari lockout, followed by Lewis Hamilton, and then Fernando Alonso coming in sixth for qualifying. The biggest news for qualifying was the biggest news for the end of round one of qualifying probably was Pierre Gasly getting knocked out in round one. He ends up having to start 20th anyways due to track limits violations. So it's one of those things that it's not exactly like he would have. Um, it's not exactly like he would have ended up doing fantastic anyways. Um, but we saw Oscar Piastri get knocked out in round one. We saw Nick DeVries get knocked out in round one. Kevin Magnussen got knocked out in round one. And Logan Sargent got knocked out in round one. And actually, Sargent tied with somebody. It might have been Lando Norris on getting out of round one. So it's only because Sargent was the second one to take his lap that he ends up not being allowed through to Q2. But pretty strong day for Williams in comparison to the last year, having one car get through to Q2 and the other car put up a great fight and get very close to making it to Q2. And had he just started earlier, he probably would have made it through. After that, we go to Q2, and it's mostly usual suspects here. Valtteri and Joe both get knocked out. Sonoda gets knocked out. Albon gets knocked out, and Norris ends up getting knocked out in Q2. Bad qualifying for McLaren here. Just something that you can't really have if you're McLaren, but it, it would only get worse from there for them. This weekend was not what they were hoping for. But like I said, actually I lied. Qualifying results. I was wrong about qualifying results. The results for qualifying were Red Bull lockout, Ferrari lockout, then Alonso, Russell, Hamilton, Stroll, and then Ocon and Hulkenberg, who Hulkenberg didn't post a lap in the final qualifying session. But yeah, after that, it was pretty cut and dry. Max ran away with the race. This is not looking good for F1 this year. It looks very much like Max could probably go out and win all 23 races and it not be a surprise. He's just so much faster than everyone else, and any race that he doesn't is probably going to be won by his teammate Checo. So it's F1's in a bit of a weird catch 22 position where they don't have a good solution for anything. We did have a couple drivers who did not get classified for this race. That's our DNFs for this race. Piastri, who had electrical issues causing him to not be able to finish the race, he ends up going down very early on. Then we get a little bit later in the race, and Leclerc actually has a huge disaster happen, and his power unit gives out on him, meaning that Ferrari already has to go to a second power unit, and he ends up not getting any points. That kind of confirmed that this was going to be a runaway year for Max, just because Without Leclerc, I don't really see Perez giving him too much trouble. And with Leclerc, I still don't really see too much trouble happening, just more of a question mark in the air. The final DNF was Esteban Ocon, who I'm not exactly sure why he DNF'd. It might have been to save the power unit. Ocon had an overall bad race. He ends up getting a 5-second time penalty for being out of position on the grid, then gains a 10-second time penalty for not serving his 5-second time penalty correctly, and then gets a time penalty for speeding the lane. So he had a horrible weekend, and I'm guessing they just decided to retire the car late in the race because it wasn't worth trying to figure out what was wrong with it. Lando Norris ends up 2 laps down. He had temperature issues in his car throughout the week, so sadly for him, he never really was going to get the chance to race. I think he was only out there for sponsor reasons and to gather data since he was so far out from the beginning. Then we had our cars that finished a lap down. That would be positions 12 through 16, and that would be from 16th up. Zhou, Hulkenberg, De Vries, Magnussen, and Sargent. Zhou, Hulkenberg, De Vries, and Magnussen all were a lap down for a good little while. Sargent went down a lap within the final 2 laps of the race. The biggest thing that jumps out is the fact that both of the Haas drivers are down here outside of the points and a lap down. That's not a good sign of things to come. I know that both of them actually managed to pick up damage early on in the race, I believe, which really squandered a good qualifying by Nico Hulkenberg. And it does hurt that Magnussen got caught up in that too. While there were no real incidents, there were definitely a couple times where somebody just got run into the back of and some piece came flying off, and I think that happened to Magnussen early on in the race. Our final non-points scorer was Yuki Tsunoda, who ends up just about a second behind, or a second out of the points. He put on a good charge there late and looked decently strong throughout the race. It's just the fact that the AlphaTauri is just so much weaker than every other car on the grid that it wasn't going to be possible for him to win, or for him to get into the points over anyone else that wasn't having problems. And that brings us to our first finishing order of the year for F1, where Alex Albon ends up getting 10th place and gains a single point. He was always right around there. It helped him a little bit when cars started dropping out. I think had Leclerc not been forced to drop, he probably would not have gotten points. And I don't think Williams is going to be consistently earning points. However, I do think that in races where we see 4, 5, 6 drivers not finish, then Albon or Sargent could definitely earn points in the long run. I'm leaning more towards Albon just because Sargent's still a rookie. I don't think he's proven himself as much yet, but 10th and 12th is a tidy little finish for Williams, especially in comparison to last year where they struggled so much. Pierre Gasly ends up coming home 9th for Alpine. He brings home 2 points. While not the best finish in the world, he was fast. I think he got held up because of a DRS train between Albon and Tsunoda. Zhou was in the DRS train at a point. We'll actually get to why he does not finish higher in a minute. I forgot that he actually had a reason not to finish as high. But then we got Valtteri Bottas for Alfa Romeo. That's a good finish for them. George Russell comes home 7th in the Mercedes. Mercedes is just out of it right now. They don't have an answer. Lance Stroll comes home 6th in a strong run with Aston Martin. He is still recovering from wrist surgery, I believe, and he actually had a bit of controversy early in the race by early in the race, I mean on the first lap, when in going into turn 4, I believe, he actually hit Fernando Alonso in the back of the wheel causing Alonso to lose control of his car for a minute and have to recorrect. And it sounded like Aston Martin never told Alonso exactly what happened. So Alonso ends up going through the whole race wondering who hit him. And I guess he probably got told afterwards who it was and wasn't as mad, but was still probably a little frustrated. After Stroll, or above finishing above Stroll, comes Hamilton. Bad start to the year for him. He just never looked like he had it. He finishes 50 seconds back of Max. Mercedes doesn't look like they're going to do much this year. They could slip even further down the constructors' title. I'm wondering if that seat under Toto Wolff is getting a little bit hotter in terms of being the main man at Mercedes. Carlos Sainz finishes 12th for the Ferraris. It's not going to help them in terms of constructors, but it's only the first race. They looked like the second fastest team as a whole. Sainz probably looks like the fifth or sixth fastest driver out there. He gets a little bit of help from his teammate going out. But yeah, Sainz comes home fourth. Alonso comes home third. That's a podium in his debut with Aston Martin. I'm not surprised by that. He looked very fast all weekend. Charles Leclerc probably would have gotten third and or second if he finished the race. However, he did not finish the race, so he's going to end up coming home outside of the points not classified, and that allowed Alonso to get the podium spot. Perez finishes second. He gets 18 points and finishes 11 seconds back of his teammate. Perez did pretty good this weekend. He had a couple decent overtakes. Nothing too special. Like I said, the Red Bulls are very strong. They're going to win the Constructors' title this year. I would be willing to put money on it. But obviously, that leaves one name unaccounted for, and that is our race winner, Max Verstappen, taking home the full swath of the 25 points for race win. He dominated the field, ends up 11 seconds ahead of Checo, 38 seconds ahead of his nearest non-teammate. And it was never in question it was Max going to win or not. He ends up getting out to a lead early on in the race and never looked back from there. Even at the times where Charles Leclerc was second, it just would never have been enough to jump him. So going back to when I said Zhou Wang Yu ends up having a reason for finishing further down the list. He ends up actually taking the DHL fastest lap. I believe Pierre Gasly had it before Zhou Wang Yu took it, which could be why the Alfa Romeo team decided to send him out to take it. It looks like that could be a midfield battle. That AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo team, especially with the Alpine Alfa Romeo team. I'm gonna have to get used to Gasly not being in an AlphaTauri. Alpine Alfa Romeo could be our kind of midfield battle for the year, where it's that who's gonna finish fifth. Um, I could definitely maybe see Williams jumping up there too, depending on how their form fits. And McLaren, I'm sure, will rebound after this race. But that is why Zhou ends up finishing so low. Our fastest pit stop goes to Ferrari with a 2.2. That great for Ferrari. The fastest pit stop doesn't really make or break anything when your car will not work for the full race. I'm sure that fastest pit stop was on Leclerc, and it ends up going to waste as Leclerc doesn't finish. The driver of the day, as voted on by the fans, was Fernando Alonso, and I have to second that. I think Alonso had a great race. He had some spectacular overtakes. If you get a chance, go look up his overtake battle with Hamilton. It was fantastic. I think he ends up overtaking Hamilton in turn 10, which is not somewhere where there was a lot of overtaking happening. But yeah. So I got 3 buy or sells for this week. Buy or sell 1, Red Bull. And not just Red Bull. I'm going to buy that Red Bull wins over 90% of the races this year. There are 23 total races, and they just look too dominant right now. That means that they would have to win 21 of the 23 races to win over 90%. And, okay, let's make over 80% of the races this year. I think that there are a couple races where somebody could get, but when it comes down to pure speed alone, Red Bull will be unmatched, untouched, unquestioned. They are going to be the fastest team. They are going to dominate. Verstappen could easily break his own record from last year. Now, going to buy or sell Fernando Alonso, I am leaning buy on this. Let's say I'm about 60% in the I'm going to buy Fernando Alonso side of things. He's looked very good through one race, but he's also looked very good through one race. It's not a big sample size. I know that they were fast at practice, but that was at Sakir, I believe. So I'm not sure just what tracks that kind of helps and hurts. But I don't think Aston Martin will fall off too much unless for some reason they hit the budget cap. Then I would start kind of hitting that panic button a little bit. Final buy or sell for today. It's gonna be a buy or sell. McLaren ends up finishing outside of the top five, and I'm gonna sell that. I think McLaren had a bad start to the season. I could still see them trying to claw their way back into a fight with Mercedes, just because I don't think there's gonna be that much fall off in just a year. They is what would have had to have happened was they would have had to have gone from a slightly uncompetitive car to a car that is not competitive at all. And I just don't think they end up doing that, even if it means they have to revert back to last year's car setup. I could see them doing that before just giving up flat out on the season and finishing in sixth or seventh. In terms of constructors, they're too prideful to do that. So, real quick, we're going to go over to Formula 3 and talk about their races for the weekend. Let's see. So, the sprint race was Marty, and the feature race was Bortoleto. I believe Barty might have been, or Marty, Joseph Marty might not have been the front runner there, but I'm not surprised that Bortoleto won. From what I saw from Formula 3 this weekend, Bortoletti seemed to have the fastest car. He got caught up a little bit just in terms of being stuck near the mid pack in the first race, which did hurt him a little bit, but that's one of those things that can easily be fixed. He's the points leader as well, coming out of Sakir. Yeah, he ends up not getting any points in the sprint race, but that's made up by winning the feature race and doing so in dominant fashion. Now, I will say that he was not the first driver to cross the line in the feature race. However, the driver that crossed before him ends up having a 5-second time penalty. No. Yes? That might not actually be true. I think it is. I think that was F3 that had the 5-second time penalty in the feature race. But that's more so to do with the fact that he just let him drive by and then stayed close enough that the guy that passed him would not be able to take credit for the win, even if he crossed the line first, which that's understandable. Smart way to do it. Keeps you from having to be too worried about crossing the line first. So after F3, we got F2. Gosh. So we're gonna go look up the F2 results for Bahrain real quick. In the feature race, Teo Porcher takes it home over Ralph Boschung. Those two were up at the front all day. I'm not surprised by that result either. Not much to say about that in terms of just what happened. Kind of one of those ones that's just yeah, it's there. It happened. It existed. For the sprint race, ooh, that's qualifying. That's not what I wanted. But like Porcher finished top in qualifying, so I'm not surprised to see him. And I think he actually won the sprint race too. Um, maybe not. Maybe not. Hold on. I am confused. No, Ralph Boschung won the sprint race. But yeah, I mean, that's one of those ones that six one way, half dozen the other. Porcher leads the standings over Boschung, over Zane Maloney, but not too much of substance happening there in terms of what's going on. That brings us over to the states where IndyCar had their first race of the weekend at St. Pete, and this was the um, debut race of Indy Next, which is just Indy NXT, and this race was not super crazy, but definitely a little a little bit more wild than I think a lot of people would want to admit. So Daniel Frost actually ends up taking home the win after Jacob Abel, who led for most of the race, ends up locking up on the final restart and losing out. This race does have to go to time to be finished. Sadly, they had so many incidents that it just was not possible for them to finish in any semblance of an actual finishing position. We had a couple DNFs. Lewis Foster, Matteo Nani, Josh Pearson, James Rowe, Jagger Jones, Inam Ahmed, all get DNFs. Sorry, Foster doesn't get a DNF. He was just a couple laps down. Um, he Foster ends up a couple laps down. Just bad luck for him. Jamie Chadwick ends up a couple laps down. She really seemed to struggle a little bit in this race, which I kind of feel bad for because it just kind of feels like a lot of people are going to highlight her struggles when I think this is just her trying to get used to a new type of car, away from the W Series into Indy Next. Give it time. It's not like IndyCar's this massive series where anyone can come and dominate. We saw Jimmy really struggle with IndyCar when he first got here, and he was a much more experienced driver when it came to it. So Chadwick has a bad race, gets into a couple incidents, but a lot of it was just running entire barriers straight off. That would give way to the IndyCar's first race of the year. Which, can we talk about the IndyCar schedule for a second? IndyCar, I come from a place of love here, man. I love your product. It's probably the best pure racing all around that you can get out of any of the three major racing series, possibly even including IMSA. Y'all need to push this more. Either take the start of the season and move it back, or add a couple more races, like add one or two more races to the start of the season. But I don't want to wait a whole 27 days from St. Pete to Texas. Like let's get it going. Let's get the season started on a high note and carry that momentum. You're going to lose out on people who would be willing to watch because all of a sudden they see St. Pete and then just nothing. And St. Pete was not let's just say St. Pete was not your most shining moment here. On the first lap, of the race, we just had a little bit of a dust up here as we saw a grand total of 5 drivers get knocked out before we finished the lap. Those 5 being Benjamin Peterson, a rookie, Simon Pagino, Devlin DeFrancesco, Santino Ferrucci, and Elio Castro Neves. They all end up wrecking out, and it was a big mess. going into turn 3, I want to say, or coming out of turn 3, someone lost control of their car, goes sideways on the track, and they just stack up behind them and ends up with, I think Peterson piles in late, sending, I believe, Pagano up into the air. No, it was Castro Neves that goes up in the air. Very scary incident, very reminiscent of a Daytona type incident, which is never what you want to see out of IndyCar of all things. After that, Rinus VeeKay ends up in the tire barriers, I believe. Around lap 41, Colton Herta has a problem. He ends up leaving the race after 49 laps. Felix Rosenquist, he ends up out of the race. And then we get to the biggest moment that had people talking, the pit stops from Scott McLaughlin and Romain Grosjean. Both of these two dogs were up at the front fighting for that win all day long, and it looks like it's going to come down to who can get out of their pit stop first. And Grosjean goes first. He does the first pit stop. He gets out. He's putting down a hot lap. In comes Scott McLaughlin, who we then see take his pit stop. We go to the upper view where, they do the little look down on the cars. We see them merging. They end up merging. McLaughlin is out in front, but on very slow tires. We got Felix sitting Romain Grosjean sitting right behind, ready to go. We go up. They're just going and going and going. Romain finally gets tired of following, jumps to the outside. They get side by side, and McLaughlin just... It was a race for the win, but it was the wrong move by Scott McLaughlin. I'm not going to sit here and say that I wouldn't have made the move too, but McLaughlin just goes in deep into the corner, locks the brakes up, essentially runs Grosjean into the tire barrier. Grosjean's race is over. McLaughlin's is not. However, he would not recover the positions that he lost from it. We would see a couple other drivers. Stingray Robb. I believe Stingray Robb was caught up in that first lap incident. He ends up being able to still keep running. Finishes 96. Joseph Newgarden finishes 95th. Kirkwood, 97 laps. Daly finishes 99. And then in terms of lead lap cars, we had Agustin Canapino. He gets 12th. Marcus Armstrong gets 11th. Malukas gets 10th. Lundgaard gets 9th. Palou, Powerwall, and Ilott. A good run for Callum Ilott today in his car. A solid 5th place finish. Alexander Rossi gets 4th. And then for our podium, we get Scott Dixon in 3rd. Pato O'Ward, who looked like he was going to win the race. He goes into the final 2 laps with the lead. Yes, it's coming down, but it doesn't look like Marcus Ericsson, who ends up winning the race, is going to catch him. He comes to the flag with 2 to go, I believe. It might have been the white flag, but I think it was 2 to go. And he accidentally hits the pit limiter of things coming out of the turn. This causes him to lose the lead. He was not able to recover. He was not going to be able to recover. He just ends up out to lunch and ends up missing out on winning the race because of that. So, still a little too early for me to be able to buy or sell anything off of IndyCar. It's such a hard one to predict because it's so... I don't want to say it's top heavy because it's not, but it's not... There's a little less obviousness with IndyCar. But like I said, great way to start the season. Wished for a little bit better, but you get what you can take. So finally we go over to NASCAR, and they actually had the first event of the weekend with the Truck Series race. I'm not going to talk about this one too much just because Kyle Busch was in it, and Kyle Busch won it. And Kyle Busch looked like Kyle Busch doing it. It was in a KBM car. He went out there, he came, he saw, he conquered, and that was it. That was the truck race. Come to the Xfinity race, and Kyle Busch was in the Xfinity race and lost. And did not actually look all that great for Kyle Busch standards in Xfinity. However, I think that's more to do with the fact that Kaulig seems to be struggling right now with their Xfinity program. I don't think they have found a way to strike a balance between Xfinity and Cup yet, like a couple other organizations have done. They might have gone a little bit too far in, a little too quickly, but I'm not really complaining about that because that's more seats for a lot of very good drivers who might not have had one. So in terms of Kaulig, they did almost win this race. I should give them credit for that. Chandler Smith almost won the race. I don't believe there was a late race restart, but he ends up coming home third. This follows Justin Allgaier comes home second, and Austin Hill gets his second win of the weekend, bringing home the trophy, or second win of the season, bringing home the trophy. Oh Lord. But yeah, good race for Austin Hill. Great race for Chandler Smith. He is still very young. He'll have his chances to win races. That finally brings us to the ultimate race of the weekend, the Vegas Motor Speedway's Cup Series race. This is the third race for NASCAR this year, and the big thing to know coming in is that Chase Elliott is out. He's out for 4 weeks at minimum, I believe. And he broke his foot snowboarding, so I know a lot of people are talking about that right now. Essentially, my thoughts are you ought to go live your life as you want. I can't complain about that part of it too much. When it comes to the waiver, I think NASCAR just needs to do away with the whole system at this point. Let drivers skip the weekends they want to skip. Let drivers come to the weekends they want to come to. Call it a day. The waiver system doesn't seem to be doing anything in the long run. I don't see any merit to keep it around at this point. Just do away with it and let drivers pick their schedule. That will affect how many races they win a year and how many races they lose a year, and if they win the championship. But hey, they can do that themselves. In terms of who replaced Chase Elliott, Josh Berry got tabbed for Vegas. I believe that we haven't seen a lot of information out of who's gonna run at Phoenix yet. Josh Berry is probably the front runner. I know that they talked about it on the Teardown podcast. Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi run the Teardown podcast. It comes out every day after races, sometimes even the night of. I tend to listen to it a lot. I love it. Go listen to it. It was the first racing podcast that I really listened to. But they threw out a couple names. Jimmy Johnson, who I'm not really sure I would see coming back to run even just 4 races right now. He's a great driver, but I think he wants to stay away, and probably is not feeling the let's run for Hendrick right now when he has his own team. Josh Berry staying in the car, I could definitely see that happening. Another Xfinity driver picked up, maybe, but I mean, running through that list in my head of drivers that teams would be willing to part with, you're not going to get John Hunter Nemechek, who would kind of be the guy that I would say is the go-to Cup replacement. Just because he's with Toyota, he's with Joe Gibbs Racing. They're not going to loan JHN out to anybody right now. Austin Hill, but he's a Ford and Front Row Motorsports guy. I doubt he'll come. Chandler Smith is probably the most likely option, and that's Kaulig. They have their own stuff going on. I could maybe see Kaulig letting Chandler Smith come up for a couple weeks, but probably not. Brandon Jones, I don't think has really earned any shots yet. Parker Kligerman was a name I heard thrown around. I guess maybe Kligerman could come up, but that's a iffy situation. I'm not really sure that's a driver that brings any intangibles Josh Berry doesn't bring to the table. unless you're going to maybe do it as a Xfinity Series hero car where you got a couple Xfinity Series drivers good at specific tracks come in. So I think another name I heard from that was Corey LaJoie, which I personally would love to see LaJoie get a chance to prove it and run that number 9, especially seeing how good he's run so far this year. I don't think he's finished outside of the top 20, and that includes a 20th place finish at Vegas. He would definitely be an interesting pick. But I don't know if you want him to possibly get a win and lock himself into the playoffs, taking that possible playoff spot away from Chase when he gets back. If we're talking about borrowing drivers, there is a driver who does kind of have his season already mapped out that might be worth taking a peek at. And that driver might just be a guy by the name of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I know he's wrecked a lot of cars, but he's a safe pair of hands in terms of what he's done. The 47 probably would be willing to loan him out for a good deal, coming from a good deal from Hendrick in terms of money or something. And he already has a win, so you're not adding a guy to the playoffs through that. The one thing I could say is he probably might not finish a couple races, and you want to avoid that. But with Atlanta coming up, you're probably not going to finish the race anyways. So, but outside of that, yeah, I think Josh Berry probably keeps the tab. The one car that doesn't finish the race is Logano. He gets 36th after spinning out. He goes through the infield grass. That causes him to... Sorry, I'm very yawny today, apparently. That causes him not to finish. Cody Ware, Ty Dillon, J.J. Yaley, B.J. McLeod, Todd Gilliland, and Noah Gragson round out the 30th places. Barry, Briscoe, Dillon, Burton, McDowell, Stenhouse Jr., Ryan Preece, Ty Gibbs, Chris Buescher, Corey LaJoie is the bottom 20. Then Eric Jones, AJ Allmendinger, Brad Keselowski, Eric Almirola, Tyler Reddick, Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney, Ross Chastain, Denny Hamlin, Daniel Suarez. That is 19 through 10. Harvick, Haley, Truex Jr., Cindric lead you up to 6. 5th place was Christopher Bell. 4th place was Bubba Wallace. And then the top 3 were the Hendrick drivers of William Byron winning the race, Kyle Larson coming 2nd, and Bowman coming 3rd. This was a 2-horse race between Byron and Larson. Bowman put up a fight, Chastain put up a fight, but neither of them were going to catch Byron or Larson. They were just too far ahead. And really, Byron dominated the day, deserved the win the most. Not much you can say about that. And, if you guys have any buy or sells that you want me to do, drop it in the chat, please. Oh, sorry, my nose is completely stuffed up right now, too. So, Ford. Buy or sell their troubles. I'm buying that Ford is in trouble right now. Top driver finisher was Austin Cindric in 6th. That was after the restart. Harvick looked decent, but it has very much looked like either Logano or Harvick has to carry the Fords this year. Blaney's looked out of it. Cindric's looked out of it. Stewart-Haas Racing has just been terrible, which they've been for the past couple of years. And outside of Stewart-Haas Racing and Penske, the only other Fords are front row who aren't looking great and have their own problems going on right now. And Rick Ware Racing, who also doesn't look great. Chevy. So I am going to say I'm buying NASCAR relegating back to the mean, which is kind of sad. I wish we could have more years like 2022 where we had great racing throughout the field, but sadly I think that that's done. I do think Trackhouse and 2311 are going to kind of be a more permanent fixture near the front. Colleague could make it up there. They had a decent run today, but Suarez and Chastain looked very good for most of this race. Finishes don't reflect it. Chastain got stuck behind Hamlin, who just did not have anything on the final restart. Suarez, I believe I saw somewhere that he was the fastest car throughout the last 50 laps, without any incidents or anything. Like, if they had just started and done a 50-lap sprint with those last 50 laps, he would have ended up winning. But yeah, Byron dominates the day, wins the race. This means that he is in the playoffs. He could definitely be a deep threat come later in the year. But as it stands right now, driver standings are Ross Chastain, Alex Bowman, Kevin Harvick, Daniel Suarez, and Truex Jr. That's your 5 that have over 100 points. Chastain is in the lead right now with 129. Then comes Bowman with 126. Very respectable out of a driver that everyone always is talking about how bad he is in comparison to his Hendrick teammates. Right now, the 126 points Bowman has puts him 41 points above his next closest teammate, who, yes, does have a win, but that's still pretty good for Bowman to start the season. Yeah, Daytona has to be factored in, but still. Trackhouse has the top 2 has 2 of the top 5 drivers. That's good for them. They've done a really good job staying clean for most of the year, and this was probably their top 2 racetracks. I look to see them falling a little bit after this week. Ross might not fall out of the lead, but he'll definitely drop a little bit. He's also doing pretty good in terms of stage points. He's got 3 stage points, 1 win at Daytona, 2 wins at what's that track called? Fontana. I'm gonna go ahead and buy Ross Chastain long term. I think he could definitely probably put up a fight for being the top driver come being in the Final Four come Phoenix. He's looked really good this year. Can't take that away from him. He should have 3 top 10 finishes in the first 3 races of the year. And that is just fact. Phoenix is probably going to be his worst race out of the first 5. But all things considered, very solid start to the season for him. Chevrolet has 3 wins in 3 races. And I'm not seeing much out of Toyota that could say that I would bet on them catching anytime soon. Ford has to figure something out. They're not gonna be able to do anything. But I think that's gonna do it for today, guys. So with that being said, we are on to our Wooden Spoon Award winners, as well as the Golden Spoon for Best Performance of the Weekend. And who gets it? So, Wooden Spoon is a bit interesting this week, and I think there are a couple good options. Honorable mentions go to the first lap of the IndyCar race. That was a disaster class. I'm going to give a shout to Mercedes, but they still finished in the points. So I'm not really sure they can be nabbed for worst performance of the week. Out of NASCAR, there's not really anybody that comes to mind. Out of IndyCar, I'm gonna give an honorable mention to I'm gonna give an honorable mention to the top 2 in IndyCar, just because the 2 of them should have won that race. That's Grosjean and not Grosjean. Yes, Romain Grosjean. Sorry, for some reason I keep mixing up him and Felix. That's gonna be Romain Grosjean and Joseph Newgarden. Grosjean and McLaughlin, just for bidding each other so late in the race for the win. But I think the Wooden Spoon Award for the week has to go. Oh, and Ferrari. Ferrari gets an honorable mention for still not having their stuff figured out and still ending up with one driver not finishing a race that they should have finished. Should have finished on the podium. That's another podium that Leclerc loses because he's a Ferrari driver. But I think the winner for Wooden Spoon Award for week 2 has to go to McLaren. This is the second time a big group is getting it, and it's going to be the second time that it goes to a team due to reliability issues. Last week Mahindra won it. This week McLaren wins it. the fact that both drivers had technical issues and the only reason why one of them finished as high as they did was because you had to have one car out there to gather data says a lot, I think, about McLaren. They haven't looked great. I think they're going to be on shaky footing. I hope they're going to be able to figure something out. But yeah, McLaren, you get the Wooden Spoon Award for the week. Now for the Golden Spoon Award for the week. Also, guys, give me sports related stuff for Golden. I'd love to be able to switch from Golden Spoon to something interesting. But Golden Spoon Award for the week. Honorable mentions go to William Byron out of NASCAR, Hendrick Motorsports as a whole, IndyCar as a organization for that first race of the year. Great stuff. It goes to Pato O'Ward for having a really good race put together until he lost it. Marcus Ericsson, I'm gonna give a shout, but he's kind of a side shout. I don't really think I'm just giving him a shout because he won. Kyle Larson's gonna get a shout out, and Alex Bowman I think is actually 3 for 3 in terms of top 10 finishes. So I'm gonna give him a shout out as well. But it is for the week, so I'm not going to give to Bowman here. But I think it's obvious who wins the Golden Spoon for the week. Oh, is it? Is it? Oh, this is interesting. So, the Golden Spoon is the best performance of the weekend, in my opinion. And there are two drivers, I think, that could easily win the Golden Spoon. Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen. And I'm going to look at this in terms of the fact that I think Alonso... You know what? It's my show. I can do what I want. We're going to do this. I think that Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen both had equally amazing weeks. No, we're not going to do that. Alonso gets the highest honorable mention, coming just below the winner. Max Verstappen wins. He dominates the F1 race. I am going to put this rule in place. Verstappen can only win this week. Unless he has a race where he comes from 20th to win, Verstappen can only win this week. Because I think Red Bull is just that far ahead. No, Alonso. Okay, Wooden Spoon Award winner goes to McLaren as an organization. Golden Spoon goes to Fernando Alonso. I have to give it to Fernando. He had such an amazing weekend. Topping the charts in practice. Ends up coming very high in the other two. Ends up qualifying fifth. Alonso just was so good this weekend. I have to give him the award for best performance of the week. Verstappen will get his flowers eventually. There will be a week where F1 just has no competition. However, I will say we're getting a little bit of spice here. We're gonna add a little bit of spice next week. Buy and sell, or Sell on Monday, is going to bring in college basketball, who's about to kick off March Madness coming in 2 weeks. So I'm going to go ahead and incorporate college basketball. It's the end of their season. I'm feeling like I can throw that in here, talk about that. That might actually get us to an hour of just me talking on live stream too. But that'll do it for this week. I'll see you guys next week with my March Madness preview, the Atlanta race recap. No, it's not even Atlanta next week. It's Phoenix. I'll see you guys next week with my March Madness preview and my Phoenix race recap, as well as Week 3's Golden Spoon winner and Wooden Spoon Award winner. Reminder, Week 1 it was Mahindra Racing winning the Wooden Spoon. Week 2 was McLaren. Golden Spoon Week 1 was Rowdy, Kyle Busch. Golden Spoon Week 2 is Fernando Alonso. Have a good one. See you guys next week. And keep an eye on the Freeway Sports Network TikTok channel, as I will be posting there with a little bit more regularity as we run through the SEC tournament, to qualify for March Madness, as well as hopefully getting a couple more news stories out there. It's been a bit of a long week. I'm not promising anything for this week either, but I'm hoping that I can start getting more stuff out there. Bye.